Hi everybody, my name is Brass Rabbit and we are in the JKC Gallery on the Mercer County Community College James Kerney campus today. I'm going to be discussing a little bit about the works that are behind me and all over the place here. And this is called the Greyscale Economics Project. So the Greyscale Economics Project has 4 total phases, and this is the first phase. I'll get a little bit into discussing some things about the other phases a little bit at the end of this conversation. The Greyscale Economics Project overall discusses the lives and information and collects information from individuals who participate in non-traditional economies. And it does that through storytelling, photography, and data collection and analysis. The first phase of this project combines data collection through anonymous surveying, storytelling through interviews, and photography featuring objects that individuals who function within these spaces use on a daily basis. So just to give you a little bit of a breakdown of some of the things that we're going to be talking about and that you'll see, which are a little bit hard to see on a digital platform, but we have survey responses. They're posted up and through here, and you've got the questions that were asked, the direct answers that a participant provided. And these live up and through here. And then, so this is an example of the data. When I conducted interviews with individuals anonymously, I took their responses and put them into these quotes in the bottom. So this is that reflection of the storytelling aspect, providing a little bit more meat to this data. And then obviously we have photography, which is going to live right on over here and throughout the exhibition. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Just to begin to give a little bit of context for how this whole thing started. In the majority of my work, I have a pet peeve of things that are very complicated being muddled down into something that is easy to consume, like a headline or so on and so forth. So with the current place where we are in America and elsewhere in the world, with these really deep divisions that are based on identity politics and people having really strong held beliefs, I have within my life experience that there's a big disconnect between hard-lined first-person information and oftentimes what people feel they truly believe and think, holding these ideals and these beliefs, regardless if they've ever had the opportunity to sit down with a person who might belong to that group or subscribe to a different ideal. So if you're never able to really have a conversation with one of those kinds of people, but you have these really strong held ideas, I think it's just something that would help us move forward as a collective a lot more if we had more information generally. Everybody would be better off overall if we provided everyone with more information, and essentially with this project, that's kind of what I've tried to do. The majority of individuals will never have the opportunity to have a candid conversation with a sex worker or with a day laborer about what it is that they face in their day-to-day lives. But a lot of people have opinions about those individuals. And what I've worked to display is to sort of artificially create a conversation between those two people, to get someone to be able to understand the issues that a person faces, some of the hopes that they have, how much work they really do. So just to give that information to the general public and provide them with the ability to have like an informed discussion and just to be able to learn more about a group who they would probably never come into contact with. So that's a little bit about the ethos and the inspiration behind this overall project. To start a little bit on the surveys. So surveying is a very delicate art form. I had to do a ton of research to learn how to properly create a survey, and you can actually see, again, we've got these questions in through here. They look very simplistic from afar, and probably just looking at the survey, they look very simplistic, but it took me a really long time to decide what questions to ask. When you're creating a pool of data, it's really, really important to make sure that you really think about the outcome of the response that you're going to obtain. So what does this question mean? What does having this information mean? What's that going to do when I have, 3,000 responses? Am I going to be able to really analyze this information and pull and see trends and make something that's really worth analyzing and reviewing. So first and foremost, I had to decide what types of questions I was going to ask and what I wanted participants to provide me with. Surveying is a lot like negotiating. If you ask for too much, you're not going to get anything that you want. And if you ask for not enough, you're not going to really have anything that's worth having. So I also had to make sure that I wasn't asking tons of really long questions that people would start the survey and then say, oh, okay, well, I'm going to finish this later, or this is way too much work, I don't want to do this. After all of this work and doing lots of different research and writing down possible questions that I wanted to ask participants, I finally came to a conclusion where I had 12 solid questions. And those questions, I can read some right now. They ran around typically, how did you get into this field? How many hours do you typically work a week? Is this your main source of income? Do you have any dependents? Why do you work in a non-traditional economy? And so on and so forth. The survey itself was translated into both English and Spanish, and it was split just about 50-50 to be half multiple choice questions, so you could do those pretty quickly, and half long or short answers, so people had to, write a sentence or two. And you can certainly see that within the data that I have, some people wrote paragraph and paragraph, and it looks really, really busy, and then some people responded with emojis in certain questions. So there's a lot of really interesting variation in the types of response, and also the way that people write. I'm going to come back to that in a little bit. So I had surveys that had just about 12 questions on them. I received feedback from people that they took somewhere between 4 minutes to 20 minutes to fill out based upon the amount of detail that an individual wanted to get into. And they were completely 100% anonymous. So I have no way of contacting anyone who completed a survey. I have no way of knowing where they're from. I have no way of knowing email address, any information like that, unless someone actively reached out to me and said, I just took a survey. It was so great, thank you so much, which I did try to dissuade people from doing. So I ended up making the survey. I got a good idea of how individuals were going to take it. I had it translated into another language. I am working to get surveys translated into more languages moving forward. But what good is a survey if no one but your neighbors take it, right? So that's the next problem that I ran into. So what is the purpose of a really beautifully built survey that makes lots of sense if only your neighbors take it, right? So I built this methodology, in essence, in order to get this to people who I did not know in circles that I did not belong to. One of my ideas was basically that if I can send this to 25 people, let's say. So if I send the survey to 25 people and I say, if you're interested in taking the survey, please take the survey or share it with your friends. And then 4 of those people actually take the survey, and those 4 people share that with 25 other people. And then 4 of those people share the survey and they take the survey. And then it continues to move, this sort of viral spread into other groups of people, that I would be able to obtain a collection of data that would be really worthwhile and would be much broader than my own understanding and scope and the people who I know. So in order to do that, I had to begin what's called cold outreach. In a previous life, I worked in marketing, and I did tons and tons and tons of cold outreach. And while so much fun, I embarked on this with lots of caution. I first had to decide and determine what types and groups did I want to include within this project. So that's differentiating who could basically fit into this idea of someone who works in a non-traditional context. So I wrote down as many different professions and places that I could possibly think where someone would be able to fit into. And I did that multiple times over and over and over again. And eventually I came down to having several lists that were floating all over the place. And I decided to choose just about 35 different groups in order to really focus my attention on for this phase of the project. I did that because in order, when you're working with data, you need to make sure that you're not accidentally obtaining more information from one group and not obtaining enough information from another group. So if I accidentally reached out to 127 in-home residential cleaners, and I only reached out to 9 day laborers, then you would assume after looking at the data that there are more cleaners than there are day laborers, correct? But that would be an incorrect assumption. So I needed to make sure that I was reaching out to equal numbers of different categories of workers. And in order to do that, I selected these 35 people to focus on just for this phase of the project. And then I got to start the exciting process of reaching out to them. So we go back into the research phase, and I do tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of research. And I'm looking for spaces where people who I am looking to have fill out surveys might exist. I did a lot of this digitally. I did a lot of talking to different individuals and learning different things about applications, learning different things about different forums and places where certain people can exist, and in learning different words that people might use in order to identify themselves within a certain group. And I began filing all of this information and trying to keep really nice, detailed records of what was working, what wasn't working, and what I thought was going to be something that could help me get to the next phase of finding someone who would be willing to sit down and have a conversation with me. And I started my outreach. It's really important to keep in mind when you're doing outreach to individuals who function within so many different, vastly different spaces. I had to have very different prompts for different groups of people. It's a different kind of conversation when you are asking a professional dominatrix who has a personal assistant to sit down with you and have a conversation than it is when you are reaching out to someone on Telegram who you know nothing about them whatsoever. So I had multiple different versions of this, me asking for the same thing, basically. Would you like to take this survey? If you feel that you befit this theme, it's completely anonymous, and I hope for the best. Throughout this entire process of doing outreach to different individuals within the categories that I identified originally, I have reached out to about 3,000 people, maybe a little bit more, and into the next phases of this project, that number will only continue to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So, while I was doing outreach, I also was asking individuals, if you're really interested in the project and you want to learn more, you want to help out, I am also doing short interviews with participants that are completely anonymous. And as I mentioned before, that's where we kind of get these little guys up and through here. Interviews I kept to about 45 to 30 minutes, and they were conducted over basically any platform that the participant would have preferred. So I did interviews via text message, I did interviews via Google Voice calls, I did interviews via Telegram, Discord chats, via FaceTime, in person, over the phone, so on and so forth. And in a lot of the responses actually that you can see, it's some of the ones that were done via anything that was written, essentially. You can see the differentiation in the way that they speak, the way that they write, the slang that they use, the punctuation that they use, which I think gives a lot of life to this content. I wanted to make sure that I had this aspect in this exhibition where I was giving someone the ability to really speak to something different. This data can get kind of laborious as you continue to keep walking through the exhibition, and I wanted to make sure that I was really reminding people that, these are people as well. With the interviews that I did, I made sure that I was asking every single person the same sets of questions. That way I wasn't asking more questions to someone whose profession I was really familiar with, and that I may have been reserved with someone who I didn't know as much about their work, because I'm trying to understand, what it is that they're telling me. So the questions I asked were different from those on the survey. They were a little bit more, just to provide a little bit more detail into an individual's life. They asked some things like, do you feel supported by your community? Do you feel supported by your government? How have you how have you dealt with issues, due to your work? What do you worry about within your field? And how can society better help serve you? What would be of benefit to you if you could ask for anything? And you can see that the conversations that I had were all really, really varied, and I made sure I actually didn't really need to make sure to pick different responses, but they were all just so vastly different and complex ideas, and it was really a wonderful experience for me to be able to have that time, just to talk to someone about what it is that they do. Within some, I think it's about 4 out of 25 of the quotes that I have as well. Some of them are research, building the relationship with an individual who functions in a shadow economy. It's a very delicate thing to do, and one of the things that you want to do when you're working with a person in this journalistic way is not push an interview on the record, in any facet. So oftentimes I have tons of people who I am having conversations with and who I've been working with for months or for years or for weeks, and they're just not ready to take a survey yet and write that down, or they're not ready to have a conversation but they're willing to take a survey, or they would prefer to not have a conversation on the record at all. So to respect that privacy, but to still continue to give the viewer of the exhibition more of an understanding of what I have been able to gain through those private conversations and through the rest of my research throughout the whole process of building this body of work. I did add 1 or 2 pieces of first-person sourced research that I obtained. So let's see, there actually might be one over here. Okay, so for example, this piece is a quote that's from a fraud Bible. That's basically just a document that's passed around on a semi-annual basis, and it has information in it that helps people do whatever it is that they're interested in doing. So, some of this stuff is the majority of this is from my direct quotation from me interviewing individuals, but 1 or 2 pieces, while I am waiting for those people who want a little bit more time to continue to keep having discussions off the record, I thought it would be important to provide the viewer with the ability just to have as well-rounded of an understanding of some of these things as I have. So let's keep running over here. I guess we can start with this one. So we talked about surveys, and we've gotten into the process of interviewing. Next is really the photography. The photography was entirely informed by individuals. When I was doing interviews with individuals, and while I was both on and off the record, I would try to ask if you could, only have 5 things to do your job. Like, what are your top 5 most used objects in your work? And the objects that are in all of these photos with the people who I have asked that with were all directly informed by that. So moving forward within this project, all of this information will continue to keep growing and changing. It's really exciting for me to keep getting new objects that I have to find. Obviously, many objects that I've been told I was not able to source, and I'm still working on doing that. So, the photography will keep growing and changing, and it will keep evolving as I am told new things, and as with the data and the survey responses as well. One of the things that I thought it was so important to ask this question specifically to participants is that if you have a regular job and you work in a traditional context, the requirement of an object is not going to be the end-all, be-all of your work. But if you're a cleaning person and you work night shifts and you don't drive, you get rides to work, and one day you happen to forget your cleaning fluid and it's 11:45 at night and you have no transportation, and now you have no way to do the majority of your job, you will lose your job. And I think it's extremely important that we focus our attention on that reality. People who work traditional 9 to 5s, or who even work in a legal context, are not as immediately aware of this issue, and that focus on, I have spent all of my money in order to be able to purchase the tools to start working here with a friend who was able to get me this job, and if someone steals those tools, or if I no longer have them, then I'm not going to have all of my stability is completely gone, because finding that supplementary employment immediately, if you legally cannot work for some reason, or if you cannot find legal work, is going to be next to impossible and can be very, very difficult. So this focus on objects, this focus on these really mundane, uninteresting things in everyday life, I think is really, really important, because it means stability, it means safety to one person, even though it might be just extremely uninteresting to the average worker or the average American. Let's see. So I wanted to make sure that I was highlighting that idea. I wanted to make sure that I was highlighting that concept. But there's another idea that runs incongruent with this whole exhibition, and data, journalism, acquiring data is one thing, and the storytelling kind of fits into that mold, but why add photography into that context? Why add, this kind of third component? And the reason for that, in essence, is because the thing that this exhibit discusses, the overarching theme of all of this work, is money. And money is one of the most complicated things that we will all have to deal with in our lifetime. Not many people understand the concept of money, its spread, its ability to rise and fall in value, but it's something that we have all, not consented to, but we are all wrapped into evolving our lives around. And I say this all the time, money will rule your life, money will rule my life. We will spend the majority of our adult lives working to obtain money. And it can decide how you can reach your dreams, it can decide how successful you will be, it can decide all of these different factors in a person's life. Money is the leading cause for divorces in the United States and many other places elsewhere in the world. The concept of the stock market is a lot to deal with. The concept of retirement for many Americans is a very stressful subject. So when we think about all these things, it's a really overwhelming, not necessarily exciting thing to discuss. It's not something that we want to move towards immediately. It's not something that we want to share in parties. In America, we have this idea where we don't talk about how much money we make. It's this sort of shuttered, deep anxiety that no one can really get out of or solve immediately. And in keeping in line with that train of thought, there are a whole group of people who experience that anxiety, but their reality is 10 to 15 times worse because they don't technically exist. So they have all of the same worries, they have all of the same fear, they have all of the same instability in their lives, but they're not visible to everyone else. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to add photography into this exhibit. Because when we are driving or when we're walking and we see somebody who's trying to sell bottles of water for $5, all that we do is we just look away from that individual because we can't take the fact that there's a person who has such deep problems that we don't want to solve and we don't want to try to face when we can't solve our own problems. But I think it's vital that as a community, that as a culture, and that as a society, we all are willing to take time to learn about things that don't actually immediately involve us, but that we benefit from on a day-to-day basis. So I wanted to add photography into this exhibition, and I wanted to make photography that was of really uninteresting, really mundane things. Because I want you to not be able to look away from this. I want it to be obnoxiously colorful. I want it to be poppy and something that stands out and something that draws your attention, because this is someone's life, and it's vitally important that we take the opportunity to read what this says and to understand something that we didn't understand previously. You know, it's a really, really amazing thing that any of these people even decided to trust me enough to give me their information, to give me this personal information that no one wants to really talk about. And I wanted to add a component that would really draw an audience in. Because I think that this is personally fascinating, but not everyone does. However, though, if you have benefited from at least one person who's on this wall previously, and you may have some really strong feelings about what some of these people do for a living. But they're not going to go anywhere, and they still definitively do exist, and I think it's extremely important that, if anything, you can at least obtain more information about these individuals and about what they do. So something that's important to mention about this project is that it constantly is going to grow and it will constantly change, even when I stop actively pursuing working on it. I've been working on this project for about 5 years, and it will take me possibly another 5 or more to get to the last phase. But all of this data, all of these responses, will live forever on an online database where anyone can see it and can access it and review this information in the format of a spreadsheet. The surveys will be live forever. So as attitudes change, as work changes, as laws change, as policy moves, you'll be able to see this content change and shift as well. So all of this, the data in addition to, the database in addition to the individuals who will be able to provide new answers, that will always be available, and it will always be an option for reference. And I'm hoping that as this project continues to grow, this massive information will get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it will become more and more valuable and more helpful to be able to understand and learn how we can better fit our lives together as two different sides of an economic function. To get into a little bit about where the next part of this project is, so again, this is phase 1. Phase 2, I'll be doing a lot of documenting the overall project of creating yet another exhibition. I'm going to be focusing more on surveying in person. The majority of the surveys that I completed for this phase of the project were digital, and you just can't assume when you're doing surveying and you're collecting data that everyone's going to be able to meet you at a digital platform. So I'd really like to focus on doing more in-person surveying. So that'll be me standing on street corners, asking people to put surveys in little black boxes. And I'd like to translate the survey into more languages to have more different kinds of responses from a wider group of individuals. And I'm going to start meeting with individuals who I've been working with for many years and shooting them in their spaces and showing what it is that they do and what their day-to-day lives are like. As I continue to keep doing interviews as well, I'm going to be building yet another body of work that will kind of live beside some of this photography, expressing the objects that they use and so on and so forth. So that'll be the second phase, and all of that I'll be documenting heavily to put on social media, and so you can kind of see how this type of project evolves and grows. The third phase is an exhibition of that work, and then the fourth phase will be a book, including the majority of the data with some pretty serious analytics of information that I've been able to obtain by that point. Some charts and graphs and other things that I'm hoping that I will make more interesting than they sound, and a collection of photography from both of these shooting rounds, so phase 1 and phase 2 as well. And yeah, thanks so much.